Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for the next Breath of Life conversations. Today, I get to speak with two amazing intuitives who have just amazing gifts to give to the world, and I want to share them with you. And they were both with me on my journey through Soul Teacher, a mastery intuitive course led by Nikki Novo, as you are all well aware, probably by now, if you have gotten this far with me. So let me introduce them. And then what we're going to be talking about today is about a wonderful author, Neale Donald Walsch, who is the author of many books, his most popular being Conversations with God. And I just really am interested in what these two beautiful ladies have as like their opinions on their thoughts on this author and what he has to say and what he has presented to the world. So without further ado, let me introduce you to these two ladies. Emily is an intuitive, she's a tarot reader, she is a mom, she is a wife, she is all the things. And she is here with me today to talk about this amazing author, really, and his perspectives. And I also have with me V. She is an incredible intuitive as well, does readings just like Emily does as well. And she is a professional. She is out there in the world saving lives. And we are just so welcome to have both of you ladies here. Thank you so much for being with me. All right, ladies, so let's just dive right in. So Neale Donald Walsch, had you guys heard about him before I brought him to your attention?
So I had not. That video that you sent me, that was the first time I had ever heard of him. And again, like I'm not a YouTube like long video watching person, but I loved everything he talked about, the interview, like his presence even was just like so soft and like warm and like knowledgeable and like sure of himself. I just loved it.
I found him because my aunt, who lives in India, was in a book club there and they were reading Conversations with God. And my mom was like, you should look at this book. And I should take my mom's advice more, but I normally don't. But for some reason, this book just, like Emily, I was like, there's something about that sounds like I need to read it. So I think I read it 2 years ago, and it has been the most, I mean, it's my Bible. I base my entire life off of it. If I'm like out of alignment, completely out of alignment, what I always go back to, like all my friends know to tell me now, like, have you been reading Conversations with God? Like, you need to go back and read it again. Like, because it's like it's the only conception of God that's ever made sense to me. And it's just like, I don't know. It's pretty much a great manual on life. I really, really love it. It's my favorite book in the world.
I really found that his perspective on the relationship between God or Source and us as humans was really interesting. And I found it provocative in a lot of ways. Like I know that in the clip that Emily got to watch, he makes this reference to us being no different from God than a wave is to the ocean. Yeah. And it was such a beautiful metaphor. I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense to me. This is what the law of one and all of these unity consciousness people have been trying to explain. And I feel like, why is this the one thing, right? Why has nothing else made sense? They're all saying the same thing, but that made sense to me.
Essentially what he says is that all of us are individuations of God having a human experience. So if you think about it, he always uses the white room analogy, where if you are in a completely white room, so you wake up, you open your eyes, you look down, all you can see is white everywhere around you. There's nothing else. You're just suspended in a white room, and you start to go crazy after a while, until all of a sudden like a black dot comes up. And so now you're able to conceptualize yourself because you have something to relate yourself to, right? So like I'm larger than the black dot. The black dot is black, I'm not black, so therefore I must be a different color. And he basically talks about how, if you think about that now, every single person in the world is its own little individuation of God having a human experience, because when spirit is like all one, it can't know itself as anything. It's just existing and being. And so it has to split itself in order to experience itself as anything. So it's like when I get really frustrated with people, I'm like, okay, this is just God deciding to experience himself as vengeful or, you know, as jealous, and like God's allowed to have that experience. Like God's allowed to know what jealousy is. And eventually it's like you have to trust that experience will get old, and then God as that person will decide to experience a different emotion, you know. But it really helps me feel more connected to people, because I'm like, okay, this is just like another piece of me deciding to experience this emotion. And that doesn't mean that like I don't react, but I really love, like, that's one of my favorite practical ways that his teachings have helped me like day to day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Emily, does that resonate with you at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I really loved his analogy with the ocean again. And like, you know, what V was just saying, it's almost like we're all here like living this life together, but we're like opposites of each other. We're being able to express ourselves by and understand ourselves by seeing like the opposite in other people, and even the parallels in other people. And I think that's like a really beautiful concept. And it really can give you a lot of insight about yourself. You know, what he was talking about in the interview, he said that like one of the biggest problems today is like alienation and separation, and people looking at other people and saying, you are wrong because you are different from me. And then they don't question it any further than that. And like, if we are all the same thing and coming from the same consciousness, then it goes back to that old phrase, when you point one finger, there's always three pointing back at you. And it's like you telling another person they are wrong is telling you that there's something within that like you are approaching from a place of lack, and that there's something that you need to look at. So like, if I'm triggered by this person, if I am jealous by this person, and I just like leave it at that and be like, well, you know what? I'm blocking them, never looking at their stuff again, done. Like they're the problem, not me, versus saying, why am I triggered by this person? Like what about their experience is like lacking within me? And the more you question that, the more information you find out about yourself, and the more compassion you can share and hold for other people. And that's what brings us back together, is that sense of compassion and wanting to understand each other.
Yes, absolutely. I think that should be the thing that like unites us all. V, why do you think that it's not? I know that that Neale has his thoughts and perspective on. Do you agree about, you know, why society, our global society, not even just American society, has this inability to fully like hold on to this notion of we are one, we are divinity?
Yeah, because I mean, we're the vast majority of us are asleep. Like I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I just mean that it's not society's fault necessarily. There's so much conditioning at play. And especially in Western cultures, I think Eastern cultures do a much better job, to be honest with you. But in Western cultures, you know, we glorify individuation, and we glorify how your actions, like if you think about it, you know, what does anybody tell you if you get broken up with or someone does something wrong? Like that's a them problem, that's on them, you know, like it's always us versus them, versus we don't ask ourselves to see like what in me triggered that response in them. Like I don't know, does that make sense? Like I think we glorify personal responsibility when it comes to our achievements and like patting ourselves on the back, but we don't take any personal accountability when it comes to examining why we have circumstances in our life that we don't want. And we're so defensive as a culture. And I think that's okay. I think that's just like part of the process of like, you know, you have to individualize to then come back together. But I think we've taken it too far, and there's a lot of powers that be that seek to keep us apart, because we're obviously very, very powerful when we are together. And it's not just the powers that be, it's like commercial, I mean, it's materialism, it's all the things we need to feel better than or worse than other people. It's the way that we assign value to people in society based off of what they do and how much they make, and all these things that don't actually matter. And so until people like, I think people have to get exhausted of living the rat race to wake up. I think some of us, for some reason, like I feel like the people who wake up earlier have harder childhoods or harder backgrounds that force us to like ask tougher questions more quickly. So in a way, you got to bless your pain, because like it's what woke you up. If you lived like a cushy life your whole life, you'd never ask yourself these tough questions, and you'd probably live a pretty okay life, but like, I don't want okay. Sorry, I don't even know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I mean, you bring up a good point too about, you know, I mean, we all have our struggles, right? And I think that there are a fair number of people within the spiritual community who have this idea that like we don't actually have to like go through pain and struggle in order to come to our awakenings. But I think, I mean, and Neale says it too, I believe in many of his books, that like the whole concept of duality, right? That like you can't know peace unless you've known war. You can't know light unless you've known dark. And I think that specifically within the spiritual community, you see so much of people saying, I want to live in the light, I want to see in the light. But the thing is like we have a word for doing our own personal healing, and it's called shadow work. And like we talk about that all the time. And yet you see so many people within our community, and it almost makes me sad in a way, because it's like if you devoid yourself of that, how in the world do you know that where you at or is where you want to be, unless you know that where you are is not fun for you?
It brings into question, like, especially when we're doing that healing work for other people, it is so important to have done the shadow work, because how else do you expect to connect to those dark sides, you know, that you see in others? Like that's one of the best things about doing readings for people, is that intimate connection and being able to come from a place of understanding of the shadow within them, because you yourself have experienced that. And that's what really shows and breaks down the walls and allows us to express that vulnerability and feel safe with each other, because we understand that we've all been there. Like we've all been there. We've all
Exactly. I wrote it down because I was like, that sticks for me. And I'm curious as to what you guys think. So there was a question that Neale poses, and it is it possible that there is something about our lives, us, God, that we don't fully understand, that the understanding of which would change everything? When you guys think about that, does anything come to you? I think the reason for the question was that we need to question things, that we need to ask better questions. And this idea of like, if you go and you just say my way is the only way, then you're not asking those better questions. So I'm curious, V, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, when I think of that, I think of my constant question, which is like, I don't know if I'll ever get the answer to this in this life, but it's the balance between, do I create my own life or do I surrender to a higher power? And I don't have the answer. And I pretty much read this book over and over again, hoping for some kind of like movie, because it really, I mean, if you read the whole series, like, I mean, there's like 10 books in it. He really goes back and forth. God really goes back and forth between like, you create your reality on thought, word, and deed. And then later talking about how like you can have intentions, but you shouldn't have preferences, because then when you want something to go a certain way, you need something to be a certain way. But then he talks about how I can have anything I want. And so I'm very confused by it still. And I would say this, like my biggest question, and maybe it's like what I'm here to like fully understand in this life. I feel like other people don't struggle with this as much. But that I'm a control freak. So this is like, of course, this is the answer I'm like seeking over and over again. But I mean, this morning I was just thinking like, maybe it's just both, like, and I have to just accept that there's no black or white answer. It seems like that's the pattern in life, is that it's never one way or the other. The answer is always somewhere in the middle. And I say that with everything, like politics and arguments with people and everything. The answer is always somewhere in the middle. I think the thing that we really don't understand as a society is what love is. And he talks a lot about that in our books, because cultures and a lot of religions say God loves us, but the definition of love as a society, even if you look at our relationships, like they're very dysfunctional. That's why 50% of people end up divorced. Like we don't know what true love is. We think love is what we can get from someone, when true love is what we can give with no expectation. And I think that understanding is really hard for a lot of us. It's definitely hard for me. But until you realize what love is, you can't understand how God loves you. And so you can't understand God. And so that I think is like what I would say is the answer to that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, V, for joining us. I know that you have to take off here. So Thank you so much for joining us. I so appreciate your perspective, and definitely going to have you on again. Would you please
thanks
come
for having
back?
me. talking about this book. It's literally my favorite book in the world, so I could talk about it all day, but I will catch the replay and I will want to see what you guys, where you guys go from here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Emily, what are your thoughts on that question?
So I really liked what V was saying. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on about her saying like the answer is always somewhere in the middle. I agree with that. And I think the middle is the place of oneness that we all like when we all choose to try to hear both sides of the story, we find that like collaboration or that mixture of them and find ourselves in the middle where we can connect to both sides and understand each other from both sides. But then the subject of love as well, I think especially in our society and Western culture, that love today is taught so conditionally. It is one of the biggest problems is like, it's unconditional love. Love is unconditional love. Okay. That's the true essence of love. That's God. That's, what brings us all back together. And there's like a division of that. Like, it's like love is here and then it gets filtered down. And then it's like, I will only love you for like these services or these actions, or people work so hard to be certain things, to individualize themselves for the sake of receiving love or validation from other people. And it's just taught so wrong, in my opinion. Like, and I think that's what the point of this work is to really kind of like tear down the idea that we are only loved or valued if we do certain things or act a certain way or say, certain things or make this much money. And just know that just simply existing and just being a soul in this vessel, like, is worthy of me receiving love. Like, I am love. Because I am love, I can give love. You are love. Because you are love, you can give love.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I think that idea of unconditional love is one that is a very foreign concept to most people. They only know love through conditions. Their parents couldn't teach them that it doesn't matter what they do, they're always going to love them. And that there's a difference between liking something somebody does and loving them, right? Like that you can differentiate between, I love you, but I don't like that you killed somebody. Or I love you, but I don't like it that you cheated on your wife or your husband. Or I love you, I don't like that you stole a cookie out of the cookie jar as my, for your child, right? And that inability to separate out, I think, was so beautifully like touched on by Neale at one point in the video, of like him saying, there's a difference between, like, being different doesn't mean that you get rid of uniqueness or individuality. Like, you can be an individual and your difference doesn't have to make you separate, right? So I feel like if we could find a way, like, how do we find a way to like teach that in schools and like make people believe it? Maybe not make people believe it, but
I encourage them.
Yeah.
Show them love it. Lead by example. Show them love so they can then believe it.
Yes.
This is like a tough question to answer, because I really do feel like it's going to take generations to really bring that love and togetherness, especially in school and in everything, because the society that we live in, everything has been built upon separation. Everything has been built upon defining yourself with a label, and how that label is different from another label. And like you said, waves in the ocean, each wave is a little bit different. It's individual, but our differences are not what define us. Our differences are almost for example, this painting behind me, right? Painted with acrylic paint. I have other paintings, completely different paintings, painted with the exact same paint. The paint is still the same. It's the same exact paint, acrylic, same color, red, but this is a landscape versus me painting a house, but it all comes from the same thing. Our differences do not define us. Our differences are more like, just like the color that we add to the world, that we can teach through and show love through and experience through. But what defines us is that central connection of love that we all are a part of, that we all share. And our differences are almost like the makeup, like that love dresses in, you know?
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I think that there's not enough people who can believe in that for some reason, that the ability to be able to take that in and feel comfortable with it, right? Being comfortable in the fact that they look at somebody who is doing something that they don't like or believes in something that they don't like, right? Like I think about religions in this way, right? You've got one religion that says this is the way, this is the only way, this is if you don't believe in this way, then you're going to be punished, which is totally separate conversation about like how insane that sounds. But at least to me, you know, it boggles my mind that they cannot seem to understand that if everyone believed the way that they did, that it would be so boring. Like the world would just be boring because there would be no spice. There would be nothing that attracted your eye, right? Like the beauty of India, for example, is the spices that they use and the way in which they cook, right? Totally different from coming to the Midwest where we make casseroles all the time. And, you know, it's very different. And most people eat nothing but salt and peppered food, right? Like they have no idea what turmeric is. So I find it fascinating that this idea that we know, right, through our work as energy workers and intuitives, right, we've been able to literally feel the source love through our work and through the people in which we help and read for. And we look at other people who have not experienced that, and I war with feeling sorry for them, like pitying them, and just remembering that like they're just a drop of the ocean at the bottom of the ocean, where I'm just at the top of the ocean, right? Like we're not different, right? At one point in some life that I had, out of the possibly, you know, tens of thousands of lives that we've lived, right, we were them. It's just crazy.
And I think really what it comes down to is, again, it comes back to compassion, because like, you know, especially when I find myself like being judgmental or towards another person, or disagreeing with what they're saying, or thinking that they sound crazy for thinking that way. And then I like try to stop and I like reflect on the situation. And the ultimate truth that I have is like, we all have our own truths. Okay. And we all have our own right to feel and believe the things that we do. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that our truth is correct. But if that truth is what allows you to be your best self, to live your best life, to, you know, influence others, to be there for others, like, then live it. And I, as a person who wants you to unify yourself with me so we can understand each other, will stop and put aside my truth to listen to yours and understand why you feel the way you do, why you think the way you think, you know, what in your background has influenced this, like how are you taught, so I can then like see you. And when I can see you and I can feel you and understand where you're coming from, I can then relate to you, because more than likely what you say, I'm going to be able to resonate with in some way, because we, again, are all like we're all like mirrors of each other. What we point out in somebody else that we see as wrong, again, you can always turn it back around on yourself. And so the more you listen to another person, not only are you unifying yourself, and you're finding a way for y'all to meet in the middle, instead of just further dividing the line by saying, you're wrong, you need to listen to me. If you don't listen to me, you're going to go this way. Like, no. Let's turn off our voices and open our ears and listen to each other. And then we can meet in the middle and shake hands and be like, all right, yeah, like I've got you.
Yes. And coming to compromise. You know, I love the fact that so many of my soul sisters believe in that both and, because I've lived that way my entire life. And it was something that I was not taught. In fact, I was taught quite the opposite growing up, that it was not both and, it was black or white, right or wrong. And, you know, you had to choose a side. And what came of that was this elusive they, right? And even Neale mentioned it in the clip, you know, quite early in the beginning, of the alienation, right? That the biggest problem in our world today is alienation. That it's, you know, those gays, or, you know, those immigrants, or those politicians, right? And I was actually just having a conversation with my mom recently about how I was like, people need to also read another great set of authors, is the Ruiz family, from the Toltec tribe. And they wrote the 4 Agreements, the 5th Agreement, Mastery of Self. And in the 4 agreements, one of the agreements is be impeccable with your words. How often do we hear, even in our own community, right, people saying, well, they don't believe that. Who's they? That's my question every time. Who is they? Can you name them? Because if you can name them, then I'll listen to you. Then, you know, then we have something to go off of, right? Then we can do exactly what you're saying, and we can close our mouths, we can open our ears, we can open our hearts, and we can listen, and we can try to see something from a different perspective. We can ask that question that Neale was asking, like, you know, is there something about this that I don't know, that I don't understand? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is yes, there is something here I don't understand, then I can move forward from there, right? Mm-hmm. If all I'm doing is saying, well, they said, well, then there's nowhere for me to go there. There's no lesson for me to learn. And all that I'm doing is I'm creating more division by stoking fear in people. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's so sad. Why people want to move through life out of fear instead of out of love or understanding or compassion, whatever it is that you want, whatever good emotion you want. And granted, like, once again, right, it goes back to like what we were saying, like, you can't know compassion until you know like complete injustice, right? Right? You can't know these things. So maybe, you know, do you think that maybe that's the problem, is like so many people just like don't fully truly understand the opposite of these things, so that because they don't understand the opposite of those things, they can't actually understand how to have compassion for people, or they can't practice it?
Oh, that's a great question. I have a couple of different answers for that. So for one thing, I mean, yeah, going back to the opposites, like you must know fear in order to know love. And especially with how we're taught today, we are taught in such a conditional love, fear-based society that so many of us do not know what love is. So deeper knowing fear, there's 2 ways that we can go about this, because people, you know, we have our ability to make our own individual choices. So you can choose to live a life of fear, but kind of like what V was saying, at some point, you're going to get fed up with that feeling, and you're going to want to, it's what I call hitting rock bottom. Like you hit that emotional rock bottom, and there's no place I can go but up. And at that point, it's almost like that release, like just that release of fear and and that surrender, not necessarily giving up, but just that surrender and that deconstruction of self, and being in that place of clay where you are now having to be rebuilt. And typically at that point is when we have our awakenings, is when we attract our tribe of love and we begin to genuinely experience and feel love, and we can find that opposite. But then there's also the mindset where you just give up entirely and you choose not to look up and you stay there in that fear-based mindset. And I find that that's when people get set in their ways. You have that term of like getting set in your ways, is when you just get stuck in that area and you just actively choosing not to see anything beyond that. And then that's where we have so many like strong, opinionated, like very bitter people that point fingers, because they themselves no longer want to learn like where they can go from here. I also do think there's so much control. There's so many people above us and corporations above us that we cannot see, that are stoking the fear-based society, that want fear-based society, because it does create division. But I also feel like as humanity, as this vibration of humanity, that this is almost like divinely intentional, that we need to experience this fear in this society, in this lifestyle right now, so we can birth this new generation that we're stepping into of love, of stepping into that fourth dimension. And it's just like the more intense the fear, the greater the catharsis, the greater that that new generation is going to be, and even teaching us love.
Right.
And
yeah. Because we're never done with it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a cycle. Everything always repeats. It's always a cycle.
Yes. So is there a moment that you can kind of point out where you hit your rock bottom, if you're willing to share with us? You were talking about this moment where you're like, you just kind of have to get fed up with the status quo as it is, or, whatever that might look like for everybody, it's going to be different. But if you're willing, I would love to hear a little bit more about your story, about what that moment was like for you.
Oh yeah. So I guess I'll dive back into my first awakening moment. I was in high school. I had broken up with the guy who was my first love. So of course, in my mind, I thought we were going to get married and live happily ever after, and blah, blah, blah. Of course, that did not happen. And it was like a series of strings that I would consider that like my last string that broke, using a Paper Towns reference, if you're familiar with that book.
Yeah.
That was like my last string that broke. But on top of that, there was just a lot of stuff going on at home. My mom, she was an alcoholic, a hoarder, and it was just a buildup of emotion that caused me to like ignite the fuse on I guess you could call it my rebellious phase. So at that point, I kind of went off the deep end. I ran away from home. I got into drugs. I started dating a lot of shitty dudes, sleeping on random people's couches. Like I was being in that state of mind, a very selfish person. And I was running from all the things that I could not handle and did not want to face. And it came to a point where I hit a wall, I ended up dating a guy, one of the shitty guys that I thought I was going to fall in love with. And I did. I developed deep feelings for him. And of course, that ship sailed. And at that point, I just realized I can't live like this anymore. Like I can't keep running. I can't go back to where I've been. I'm no longer that person. I can't be back in that hoarder, like shut in house. Like I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt so lost and I collapsed. And I had a really good friend of mine who was a very spiritual person. She opened me up to the world of spirituality and auras, and even my first deck of angel cards I got with her over 12 years now. But I wound up on her doorstep and she took me in. And it was just in that period, I felt like love from her, because she just embodied this mother energy that I hadn't really experienced before, of unconditional love. And she was so warm and nurturing and teaching me all these things. And so I didn't know who I was. I was falling apart. I was in many, many emotional pieces, so much so that you couldn't even read my palm. The lines on my hand were so faint, like I had just lost myself. And in that moment, my rock bottom, that's when I began to discover source and connect to angels and just connect to that sense of love. Like I used to hold these cards and sleep with them at night and just pray and just feel that love of source and angels and just and God, and just know that I'm caught, like I'm okay, like it's okay, you know. Yeah. You can move forward from this. And that was like my catharsis. That was like that moment of going from this dark, scared, selfish, you know, emotionally fueled Emily to this place of just surrendering and peace. I didn't know where I was going to go from here, but I knew that I was safe and that I was held, supported. And here I am.
And like doing all the things, and I just like love it so much. And you can see that, and I can see it too. Like for anybody who's watching, like seriously, run to this woman to get a reading. Seriously, like there's really few people that I would be like, yeah, you can read my cards. Like Emily is one of them. And I really do think that it has a lot to do with how you view the world, because you've been through so much. And you know, I didn't know all of that story that you just told. I knew bits and pieces from just what you've shared. And so thank you so much for sharing it and being vulnerable enough to share that with us. I so appreciate that. And it really sounds like you had this really beautiful moment of going from survival to like thrival. That's not even a real word, right? You know, like truly like finding, you know, a place where you could thrive and found that place within yourself. And that is such a beautiful thing. And it's something that I would hazard few people truly get to do. You know, they have a dark moment, but then, you know, we've been lucky enough that when those moments have come, we've been able to find our awakening through that. You know, we've been able to find source love and find that within ourselves, and that you know, space of peace, and take control back, right? Like whatever modicum of control we have in this world. But I feel like there's so many people who don't, and they just sit in despair, and maybe not always despair too. I feel that that equally, you know, anybody who doesn't become awakened, who just says, you know what, it's okay, like I'll just go through life, right? I'll be the person that believes that we came from nothing and that we, you know, maybe go somewhere special, maybe not, or the people who believe that, you know, all is science, right? And, you know, when we die, we're dead, you know. I feel like those both camps, right, just miss out so much. And it reminds me of the work that we do when we go into the Akashic Records, right? And we see these people whose soul contracts, they've continuously just not learned the lessons, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if you could just figure out a way to thrive. Because survival is not the basic instinct of life. It really isn't, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's, and going back to the video, he gave that example of, you know, you're walking past a house on fire and you hear baby crying. And if survival is truly your first instinct, your basic instinct, you would just stand there and be like, no, yeah, not. Right. But like,
not today.
Most people are going to just like tear into that building even before you can think about it. Like, it's almost like your body just reacts on its own. And I think that's just because like our basic instinct is love, is love. If we can just reconnect to it. And I mean, to be fair, you know, going back to what you said, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place.
You're fine. I love it.
I haven't personally seen this yet, but I do expect that in certain Akashic records, I will find this. But, those camps of just strictly science-based thinking, or this is it, we're a human and then we die and then we turn into, an animal's shit. Like,
I mean, they're not totally wrong, but they're not totally right.
Right, exactly. The question, is there something about we don't understand?
Yes.
But, maybe in this lifetime, that's what their soul needs to experience, is that complete nothingness. And then in the next lifetime, they wake up as one of us.
Yes, right.
Or, a healer, or any of the a billion and one infinite things that we could be. Like, I just, I do believe that there are certain souls that just come here to like live that particular expression, which is hard because these lives, they're so short in the grand scheme of things, but they're so long because we so small. Like, we are so small in this life, and it feels infinite to us. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just like, boom.
I agree. I think that, when we think about what it is that we're meant for, right? Like what we're meant to learn and where we ultimately get to, right? And I think about the fact that the human mind cannot control or even fathom control, like full control, right? And all the things that go with that, right? Like, they want to believe that they can control time, that they can control space, these ineffable, the Abigailisms, right? The ineffable of the universe, right? And so when I hear people who are, very science-based or analytical or whatever, I'm like, okay, yeah, like it has a place. But when you are trying to better understand the concept of God, of the universe, hell, of gravity, right? How do you, when we literally have this much time on this planet, like you said, we're a drop in the ocean, our lives are so quick and so fast, how in the world are we ever expected to make any sort of connection, right? Like, it literally becomes like, at least at this point in my life, I'm like, this is the bane of my existence, that I have to incarnate every life and I have to relearn all the stuff that I have forgotten. Thank you, universe, for making this a thing. Why can't I just come into each life and remember everything, right?
Jesus, please.
I was talking in another Breath of Life conversation with our soul sister Allison. Mm-hmm. This was something that her and I are like teaming up on. Like, we are gonna hack the system in our next life, when we don't have to worry about this stupid human amnesia thing.
Just turn our brains in Akashic records.
Yes, dude, don't make me incarnate back here again if I can't remember.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it really becomes just, I think, a lesson in patience. And like you said, just a lesson in love and finding a way to have grace for everything and everyone, right?
Yes. And the more you question situations, the more you find that grace and that love. I was thinking about that yesterday in Chick-fil-A. I was sitting there thinking, my daughter, she's 7, she was getting mad because somebody's baby was crying. And she was like, I don't like the sound of crying babies. And I was sitting to myself and I was like, for whatever strange reason, I began to think about Jesus and the Bible. And I was like, thinking about all the things that he said and how, like, turn the other cheek, show forgiveness, show compassion, show love. And I was hearing this crying baby and I was getting annoyed myself, but I was thinking, I have 2 ways I can react to this. I can either feed into this annoyance and be frustrated and think to myself, I wish they would just take that baby out of here. Or I can come at it from a place of love and a place of understanding. And I just had this epiphany, and I was like, that's what this whole thing is about. Every trial, every blessing, even the smallest one is literally a choice of approaching it from a fear-based mindset or a place of love. And I was like, that's all Jesus was trying to say. People question, why is life hard? Life is hard because these are all lessons for you to learn and experience love and patience and forgiveness and compassion. Of course it's going to be hard.
I love it. I love it. Preach. I am your choir. You can preach to me. It's totally fine. I'm a terrible singer. Don't ask me to sing. But oh my gosh, I can't top that. That's it. Emily, thank you so much for joining me on this amazing conversation. I am so grateful to you and so blessed to call you a sister and a friend and a colleague and all the things. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you.
And thank you so much for having me. I am so grateful for this opportunity to share this love with the world, for us to connect in unity and oneness.
Yeah.
So blessed and happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I love you.
Thank you. Love you. And to all of you fans and watchers out there, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All of Emily and V's information on where you can find them, where you can follow them, where you can book with them, because they are doing readings out there. Please get out there and sign up and book with them. You will not be disappointed. Run, do not walk. All of that will be in the description down below. So as always, thank you so much for joining us here, and we will see you next time for the next Breath of Life conversations. Bye, friends.